In Florida, we have a certain flair for naming things. We don't just have retirement homes, we have places called paradise villas. We don't just have swamps, we have the Everglades, a river of grass. So when someone decided to build a massive new home for troublesome alligators, they didn't call it the Nuisance Reptile Containment Facility. No, that would be far too boring for the Sunshine State. Instead, they slapped a name on it that was pure Florida genius, a name that stuck in your head like a catchy pop song: Alligator Alcatraz. It sounds like something straight out of a Carl Hiaasen novel, doesn't it? A high-security prison, but for dinosaurs with big teeth and bad attitudes. The name alone was enough to get everyone talking, from the Panhandle down to the Keys. Alligator Alcatraz. It conjured images of gators in striped jumpsuits, plotting their escape over a lunch of raw chicken. The project was meant to be the state's ultimate solution for alligators that had become a little too friendly with people. The ones that mistook poodles for snacks or decided to take a dip in a backyard swimming pool. This wasn't just another gator farm. This was pitched as the final stop, a one-way ticket for the most incorrigible of Florida's cold-blooded residents. The idea captured the state's weird, wonderful, and sometimes worrying relationship with its most famous reptile. The buzz around the project grew faster than fire ants on a dropped ice cream cone. News channels across the country picked up the story, loving the quirky name and the even quirkier concept behind it. The developers, a company called Gator Getaway Inc., leaned into the hype. They released artist renderings of a facility that looked less like a swamp and more like a fortress. It featured double-reinforced concrete walls, deep water moats, ironically to keep gators in, and state-of-the-art surveillance systems. They promised it would be inescapable, the most secure reptile facility ever conceived by man, a place where problem gators could live out their days without causing any more trouble for their two-legged neighbors. But in Florida, even the best-laid plans have a tendency to run into a hurricane, a sinkhole, or a courtroom. The idea of locking up hundreds of powerful, prehistoric predators in one spot just outside the state capital of Tallahassee started to make some people nervous. While the name was catchy and the concept seemed straightforward, the reality of building a reptilian supermax prison was far more complicated. The facility was planned for a huge 500-acre plot of scrubland and pine forest just west of Tallahassee. The design was impressive, calling for a series of interconnected, man-made lagoons, each one carefully landscaped to mimic a natural Florida wetland. There would be basking spots, deep pools for cooling off, and plenty of space for the gators to establish territories. The entire perimeter was to be enclosed by a formidable 20-foot-high fence, topped with specialized rollers to prevent climbing. The developers insisted that the alligators would be well cared for, with a steady diet and regular veterinary checkups, living a life of reptilian luxury, albeit behind a very big wall. The purpose was twofold. First, it aimed to solve the public relations problem that comes with euthanizing so many of the state's iconic animals. Animal rights groups have often criticized Florida's management of nuisance gators, and Alligator Alcatraz was marketed as a progressive, life-affirming solution. Second, it was meant to be a tourist attraction. The plans included an elevated boardwalk, called the Warden's Walk, where visitors could safely observe the inmates from above. There would be a gift shop selling plush gators in prison stripes and t-shirts that read, "I survived Alligator Alcatraz." It was a classic Florida blend of conservation and commerce, a theme park with teeth. Supporters, including some state wildlife officials and tourism boards, praised the project as an innovative way to manage human-wildlife conflict. They saw it as a win-win. The public would be safer, the gators would be saved, and the local economy would get a boost from the influx of curious tourists. The developers promised jobs and a new unique landmark that would put this part of Florida on the map for something other than politics. To them, Alligator Alcatraz wasn't just a holding pen, it was a sanctuary, an educational center, and a moneymaker all rolled into one scaly, sun-loving package. It seemed like a perfect Florida plan. Not everyone was charmed by the idea of living next door to a high-security prison for apex predators. As soon as the plans for Alligator Alcatraz became public, a chorus of opposition began to rise from the local community. Residents of the nearby sleepy subdivisions and rural homes were horrified. They envisioned nightmare scenarios of a mass breakout, perhaps during a hurricane or a major flood. The developers' assurances of an inescapable facility did little to calm their fears. They pictured hundreds of 10-foot-long hungry gators fanning out across their backyards, terrorizing their livestock and eyeing their swimming pools. The catchy name suddenly sounded a lot less funny and a lot more threatening. The opposition wasn't just about the fear of a real-life Jurassic Park situation. A coalition of environmental groups and conservationists raised a different set of alarms. They argued that cramming hundreds, possibly thousands of large territorial reptiles into a confined space was a recipe for disaster. Alligators are naturally solitary creatures, and they worried that such high densities would lead to constant, brutal fighting, stress, and the spread of disease. They pointed out that the project would require destroying 500 acres of existing native habitat, pine flatwoods and wetlands that were already home to gopher tortoises, deer, and countless bird species, all to build an artificial home for animals brought in from elsewhere. These groups argued that the project was a feel-good solution that ignored the root of the problem: human encroachment on alligator habitat. Instead of building a gator prison, they argued, the state should focus on better public education about coexisting with wildlife and stricter land use planning to protect natural wetlands. They called Alligator Alcatraz a spectacle, not a solution, a for-profit venture masquerading as a conservation effort. They saw it as an expensive, unnatural, and potentially cruel distraction from the real environmental issues facing Florida. The project, they claimed, was more about making money off a clever name than it was about genuine animal welfare. Local resident groups and environmental organizations decided to join forces. They started petitions, held town hall meetings, and wrote letters to their elected officials. They hired lawyers and prepared to fight Gator Getaway Inc. every step of the way. They argued that the project's environmental impact studies were inadequate and that the developers had failed to properly address concerns about water contamination from the massive amount of alligator waste that would be produced. The battle lines were drawn. On one side were the developers and their supporters, promising safety and a tourist boom. On the other were the locals and conservationists, fearing for their safety, their property values, and the soul of the natural Florida landscape. The fight over Alligator Alcatraz quickly moved from town hall meetings to the Leon County Courthouse. The coalition of residents and environmental groups, calling themselves the Friends of Florida's Wild, filed a lawsuit seeking an injunction to stop the construction before it could even begin. They argued that the county commission had rushed the approval process, ignoring significant environmental regulations and failing to heed the overwhelming public opposition. Their legal team presented a mountain of evidence, from expert testimony by wildlife biologists to emotional pleas from homeowners who feared for their family's safety. The courtroom was packed for every hearing, a perfect slice of Florida drama. The developers' lawyers fought back, of course. They portrayed the opposition as a classic case of NIMBYism, not in my backyard. They argued that the facility was expertly designed, perfectly safe, and would pose no threat to the community. They presented their own experts who testified that the fence was impregnable and that the waste management systems were state-of-the-art. They emphasized the project's economic benefits and its supposed compassionate mission to save nuisance alligators from certain death. To them, the opposition was based on irrational fears and a fundamental misunderstanding of the project's sophisticated design and noble purpose. After weeks of arguments and legal wrangling, the decision fell to Circuit Judge Evelyn Reed. In a move that shocked the developers and sent a wave of relief through the opposition, Judge Reed granted a temporary injunction on August 7, 2025. This order immediately halted all pre-construction activities, from land clearing to the delivery of building materials. The judge's ruling wasn't based on whether gators might escape or not. Instead, it focused on procedural grounds. She found that the county had failed to require a sufficiently detailed environmental impact statement, particularly concerning the project's effects on local water quality and the displacement of protected native species like the gopher tortoise. In her written decision, Judge Reed stated that the potential for irreparable harm to the local ecosystem was significant enough to warrant a pause. She noted that the developers' plans for managing the concentrated waste of potentially thousands of large alligators were vague and speculative. Basically, the judge ruled that you can't just promise to build a giant gator toilet without explaining exactly how the plumbing will work and ensuring it won't poison the neighborhood's water supply. The decision effectively sent Gator Getaway Inc. back to the drawing board, forcing them to conduct more thorough environmental studies and provide concrete, science-based answers to the tough questions raised by the community. The judge's ruling was a major victory for the opponents of Alligator Alcatraz, but it wasn't a final nail in the coffin. The temporary injunction doesn't mean the project is dead forever. It simply means it's stuck in legal limbo, like a car bogged down in sugar sand. Gator Getaway Inc. now faces a choice. They can either abandon the project altogether, cutting their losses and walking away, or they can double down. The second option means spending a lot more time and money to conduct the exhaustive environmental studies the judge demanded. They would need to prove with hard data that their facility won't pollute the groundwater or destroy the existing ecosystem. This legal pause gives both sides time to regroup and strategize. The Friends of Florida's Wild are using this time to rally more public support and prepare for the next round of legal battles. They hope that the high cost and hassle of the new requirements will convince the developers that the project just isn't worth it. They are continuing to push for alternative solutions, advocating for more funding for public education campaigns that teach people how to live safely alongside Florida's native wildlife. Their message is clear. The best way to manage alligators is to leave them in their natural habitats, not to build a prison for them. Meanwhile, the future of Florida's nuisance alligator program hangs in the balance. The debate over Alligator Alcatraz has brought a lot of attention to the issue. State wildlife agencies are watching the case closely. If the project ultimately fails, they will still be left with the same problem of what to do with alligators that wander into suburban neighborhoods. The controversy has sparked a larger conversation about development, conservation, and the ever-shrinking line between the wild and the civilized in a state that gains nearly 1,000 new residents every day. It's a classic Florida conflict, playing out in the courts and in the press. What happens next is anyone's guess. This is Florida, after all, where the story is never over until the final, weirdest plot twist. The developers might come back with a revised, more environmentally friendly plan, or the political winds might shift and the project could find new life. For now, the 500 acres of scrubland west of Tallahassee remain quiet. The bulldozers are silent, and the only residents are the gopher tortoises and pine snakes that have always called it home. The fate of Alligator Alcatraz is uncertain, a story still waiting for its final chapter to be written.